Stroyana Matseva, BBA, is the founder and CEO of Happy Life Academy and the international recognized expert in systematic psychology, self-leadership, and integrative human development. She is author of 16 best-selling books, a world record holder, and chairperson of the International Association of Professional Trainers and Coaches, having trained over 3,000 certified coaches and educated more than 1 lakh students worldwide. Her work combines psychology, identity, systematic principles, and self regulation to provide a science informed framework for sustainable transformation, empowering individuals and organizations to achieve clarity, resilience, and powerful leadership. That was a wonderful bio, Stoyana. The stage is all yours.
Today, we are talking about human transformation at a historical moment when the external environment is changing much faster than people's internal adaptation. The past decades have brought unprecedented access to knowledge, methods, and development tools. Psychological schools have expanded, coaching has become institutionalized, online education has become widespread, and leadership programs have entered every professional environment. More and more methodologies, techniques, and specializations are emerging, and yet we continue to observe persistent problems. Recurring behavioral patterns, for example, chronic stress, instability in relationships, professional burnout, identity crises, and difficulty making decisions. This does not mean that the existing methods do not work. This means that they are not sufficient in their current structure. And in my practice, I have observed the following. People understand their problems better than before. They can explain their reactions, they can even name their traumas, they can formulate their goals, but understanding does not lead to lasting change. A person may realize that they are overreacting or reacting excessively, but in the next stressful situation, they repeat the same reaction. They may set a clear goal, but at the first serious pressure, they give up on that goal. They may go through a therapeutic process, but in a new environment, they reproduce the old pattern. And here comes the key question. How is it possible for a person to know but not to change? To be aware but to repeat? To have the tools but not achieve stability? The answer is not a lack of intelligence or motivation. The answer lies in the way we approach change itself. Most modern models work on separate aspects of the personality, either on behavior or on thinking or on emotions or on goals. They rarely consider the person as a whole, as an interconnected system, yet a person functions precisely as a system. He does not react only with his thoughts, nor only with his emotions, nor only with a specific habit. The reaction is the result of an internal structure that has been built up over many years. And when this structure is not recognized and reorganized, the change remains superficial. And this is where the need for a different approach begins. Not an approach that will add more techniques, not an approach that will offer a temporary boost, but a model that works with the very structure of inner functioning. And to understand this, it is necessary first to clearly see the limitations of the current model of development. That is precisely where the beginning of great change starts. What are the limitations of the current model of development? After examining the context, it is important to clearly state where the weakness lies in the current models of human development. The modern person has access to a vast number of tools for change, but most of these tools are focused on individual aspects of the personality and not on the overall structure. This creates a serious imbalance. The large part of the trainings focus on external actions. People learn how to set goals, how to be disciplined, how to create new habits, how to improve communication, how to increase productivity. But these tools, although very useful, actually leave the internal structure unchanged. The new behavior requires constant control. At the first serious pressure, a person reverts to the automatic pattern. And the reason is simple. Behavior without internal change is always a tremendous effort. Behavior supported by an internal structure comes completely naturally. Another widely used approach is the cognitive approach. It works with beliefs, with the inner dialogue, with meaning-making models. A person begins to understand why they react in a certain way. They recognize individual automatic thoughts. They try to replace them with more functional ones. This is a very valuable step, but understanding alone does not guarantee stability. In a real stressful situation, the thought model often gives way to the physiological reaction. The body switches to defense mode and the thought actually falls away. Thus, a person may know the right answer but still act in the old way. Moreover, there are approaches that focus solely on the emotional experience. Here, work is done with trauma, with pain, with anger, with fear, with guilt. Emotional release can lead to a strong sense of relief. But if a new internal position and a new way of functioning are not established afterwards, the pattern will repeat itself. The emotion changes temporarily, but the structure remains stable. In fact, one of the most serious limitations is also the absence of a systemic perspective. This is missing in most approaches. People very often view their problems as separate events. Conflict with a partner, difficulties with parents, tension with colleagues, lack of confidence. But when these events are analyzed in depth, recurring patterns are discovered. And these patterns are not random at all. They are the result of an internal structure that simply manifests itself in different. And when a person does not see themselves as part of the system, they look for a solution by changing the external environment. Changing jobs, changing partners, changing the environment, but without changing the internal position, the new environment often triggers the same behavioral pattern. What is the cycle of temporary transformation? In practice, a recurring pattern can be observed. There is an awareness on the part of the individual. Then comes a strong impulse for change, new behavior, real pressure, and after that, a return to the old pattern. This cycle does not mean that a person is incapable of change. It means that the change has affected only one part of the system, and when identity, systemic position, and the internal autobiographical map remain unchanged, behavior cannot be sustained. So what is the main conclusion? The problem is not the lack of methods. The problem is that the methods are often not integrated. Change is treated as a separate intervention rather than as a restructuring of the internal system. This is precisely where the need arises for a model that works simultaneously on all levels of human functioning. And before I present the solution, I had to acquaint you with the limitations. Only when we see the boundaries of current approaches, we can understand how different and necessary the new model is. The human being as a system. When we talk about the human being as a system, we need to be precise. This does not simply mean that a person has different aspects. It means that all aspects are interconnected and function as a single dynamic structure. The system has input, processing, and output. The input, these are the external events. However, the processing is the internal models, and the output, that is the behavior. Most approaches focus on the output, that is, on the behavior. But real transformation requires work in the processing, that is, the internal structure. What is the internal organization of a person? A person functions simultaneously on several active levels. The first level is the physiological one. This is the nervous system, hormonal response, stress activation. Under pressure, the body activates an automatic mode. The second level is the emotional one. Emotion is the first interpretation of what is happening. It is fast, often preceding the actual thought. The third level is the cognitive one. This is where thought is formed, the explanation we actually give to the situation. The fourth level is the identification level. Here, the inner image of the person is activated. I am the person who. The fifth level is the role level. Here, the person takes the position of the system. For example, dominant, subordinate, rescuer, controller. And the sixth level is the behavioral level. This is the visible boundary. All these levels are activated within fractions of a second. If a person does not become aware of them, he will simply react. The human system is designed to conserve energy. This means that most reactions are actually automatic. When a situation resembles a past experience, the system activates the old pattern. This pattern includes an emotional reaction, a belief, a role, and a behavior. For example, if criticism in childhood was associated with humiliation, then in adulthood, even neutral feedback can trigger a defensive reaction in a person. And the person does not consciously understand this. In fact, we are controlled by what we are not aware of. That is why change requires more than just understanding. It requires a reorganization of exactly these automatic connections and reactions. Every system has its own dynamics. In the family system, a person can take on the role, for example, of a stabilizer or mediator. Or a person may take on the responsibility or the role of a rebel or a withdrawn observer, for example. However, these roles are formed in early environments and often continue unconsciously into adulthood. The problem is not the role itself. The problem is its unconscious and prolonged continuation. When a person does not realize that they are actually repeating a role, they think that things just happen that way. Systemic analysis allows us to recognize this repetition, and once the role becomes conscious, it is no longer automatic. One of the most serious mistakes is to think that systems are isolated in themselves. Tension at work always affects the family system. Conflict in partnerships influences professional decisions. Inner insecurity affects leadership. Systems are not separate. In fact, the person is the carrier. If the internal structure is unstable, this instability manifests in absolutely all environments and systems. That is why the method of direct change solution, does not view the problem as a separate situation. It examines the structure that generates these situations. And this is where the inner autobiographical map comes in as the systemic center. Here we reach the key moment. The inner autobiographical map is the organizing principle of the system itself. It contains an interpretation of the past, the roles a person has adopted, core beliefs, reactive patterns, and expectations for the future. And this map, in fact, determines what a person perceives as reality. Two people can experience the same situation but react completely differently. The reason is not in the event itself. The reason lies in the internal map. When the map is not recognized, the person lives in it automatically. When it is recognized, it can be rearranged. Why is systemic analysis essential? Without systemic analysis, any change is actually only partial. If we change only the behavior without changing the role, we end up going back again. If we change only the emotion without changing the belief about that emotion, the pattern will restore itself. If we change only the thought without changing the physiology, the reaction will remain. In other words, systemic analysis allows us to see the entire chain. And when the whole chain becomes visible, we can then break it at the right place. To view a person as a system means to understand that the reaction is actually not random, behavior is not isolated, the specific role is not fixed, and identity can also be rearranged. This creates the foundation for real transformation. Without a systemic perspective, any change actually remains temporary. However, with the systemic approach, the real work begins. And the real work is self-management, even under pressure. After we've looked at the person as a system, the next critical question is actually, how does the system function under pressure? Because under normal conditions, most people appear stable. Problems start to become activated under tension. Pressure can be external, but it can also be internal. Internal means conflict, criticism, failure, insecurity, financial risk, loss, feeling of rejection, sense of injustice. Under pressure, the system does not function rationally. It functions defensively. What happens in the first seconds when a person finds themselves in a stressful situation? The process unfolds on several levels. First, physiological activation. The nervous system registers a threat, reacts, and interprets. The sympathetic nervous system is activated, heart rate increases, muscles tense up, and breathing becomes shallow. This happens even before thought, that is, emotion comes before thought as well. The second layer is the emotional interpretation. The brain looks for the quickest explanation. This is a threat, this is an attack, this is rejection, this is injustice. In other words, the emotion is active first and then the thought itself explains it. The third layer is the automatic reaction. Here the internal autobiographical map is activated. The system chooses the most familiar reaction: defense, attack, withdrawal, control, freezing. This process is automatic. And if a person does not recognize it and does not know themselves, they believe that this is simply how they react. What is the difference between an automatic reaction and self-regulation? Self-regulation does not mean suppressing the reaction, but rather being aware of the process in real time. A person who lacks internal regulation experiences the reaction as inevitable. A person who has developed internal regulation can do three things. First, to recognize the physiological activation. Second, to slow down the reaction itself. And third, to avoid the response. This may seem simple, but it requires systematic work. Why is self-management actually the key? In this case, most failures in life do not happen because of a lack of ability. They happen because of an improper reaction in a moment of tension. A leader can lose their team because of a single unregulated reaction. A parent can damage their relationship with their child due to a recurring impulsive pattern of behavior. A partner can destroy a stable relationship through a chronic defensive reaction, for example. The problem is not in the person's intellect. The problem lies precisely in the lack of this inner regulation. What are the 3 levels of internal management? In the direct change method, we examine management on 3 levels. The first level is awareness. A person must be able to name what is happening. For example, now I have activated anger. Now I feel fear. Now I am going into defense, because without awareness, we have no choice. The second level is stabilization. Here we work with physiology, slowing down the breath, stabilizing the body, interrupting the impulse. This reduces the intensity of the automatic reaction. And the third level, this is conscious choice. Once the intensity drops, a person can choose whether to speak or to wait, what tone to use and what stance to take. This is true self-management. What is the connection with identity? If a person hasn't changed their inner identity, self-management will be difficult. For example, if they internally believe that they have to prove their worth, every criticism will trigger a defensive reaction. If they believe they are undeserving, every opportunity will activate self-doubt. That's why self-management is not a separate technique. It is connected to all the other layers. How can we train our inner management? It is not built through a single moment of awareness. It is developed through systematic observation, repeated practices, analysis of reactions, and correction of choices. A person begins to recognize recurring triggers and then starts working with them until the reaction weakens. This is a process of restructuring. Why is all of this crucial for the future? In the world of the future, the pressure will not decrease. Uncertainty will also remain constant. Information, as before, will continue to increase, and conflicts may become even more complex. A person who cannot manage themselves will be constantly shaken. A person who has inner stability will be able to function strategically. And this is not a matter of personality type, it is a matter of a developed structure. In essence, self-management under pressure is a fundamental condition for sustainable transformation. Without it, a person remains in automatic mode. With it, real choice begins. And here, the direct change solution method does not offer a momentary inspiration, but provides a real model and method for reconstructing the response. If we have to point out one layer that actually determines the direction of human behavior in the long term, it is identity. Identity is not what a person tells themselves. Identity is the internal standard from which they make decisions. It answers the question, who am I? But this question is not philosophical, it is operational, because the answer determines what a person allows into their life, what they choose, how they react, what they accept as possible, and what they accept as deserved. How is identity formed? It develops gradually. It is not created by a single event, but is built through repeated experiences. In the early years, a person receives the following messages. You are strong, you are weak, you are a problem, you are responsible, you are difficult, or you are talented. And these messages do not remain external, they become internalized. They become internal. Over time, a person begins to perceive these definitions as an inner truth. Then life starts to confirm this truth, not because it is objectively true, but because the person unconsciously makes decisions related to it. And in fact, every person perceives the world through a filter. And this filter consists of beliefs, expectations, self-esteem, and past interpretations. Two people can experience the same situation and interpret it differently. For example, criticism at the workplace. One person may perceive it as information for improvement, and the other may perceive it as proof of personal inadequacy. The difference is not in the situation, the difference is in the identity. Behavior and identity, cause and effect relationship. Most people try to change their behavior, but behavior is the effect while identity is actually the cause. If a person perceives themselves as someone who cannot say no, they will say yes even when they are suffering. A person who feels the need to prove their worth will constantly get into unnecessary conflicts. A person who feels they don't deserve more will sabotage their own successes. Changing behavior without changing identity requires constant inner struggle. Changing your identity makes the new behavior natural. What are hidden identities? Many people have more than one identity. For example, professionally, they may perceive themselves as confident, but internally as insecure. In society as strong, but in intimacy as vulnerable and fearful. This inner split actually creates tension. And when the identity is not integrated, a person lives in constant inner conflict. And this is exactly where the method of direct change works. Identity does not change through affirmation. It changes first through awareness of the current inner position, second, through understanding how it was formed, third, by creating a new internal framework, and fourth, through consistent behavior that reinforces the new position. This process is not instantaneous, but it is sustainable. For example, if a person wants to go from being someone who is afraid of conflict to someone who can stand firm in conflict, they need to become aware of their fear, manage their state, make new choices in small situations, and then repeat the process. And over time, the new reaction becomes integrated into their identity. In this context, leadership and identity are critical. A leader who internally doubts their right to be in that position constantly seeks approval. A leader who is internally afraid of conflicts will avoid making difficult decisions. When a leader internally identifies as controlling, they will stifle their team. True leadership begins with inner clarity. Who am I when I make decisions? What is the connection with the internal autobiographical map? Identity does not exist separately. It is part of the internal autobiographical map. A person creates a narrative about themselves. I have always been the one who, it has always happened to me. I am the person who, this narrative becomes stable until it is made conscious. And in fact, we work precisely with this narrative. We don't deny it, we don't ignore it, but we analyze it and restructure it. Because identity is actually the center. Without a stable identity, emotional regulation is difficult, the systemic position is unclear, behavior is unstable, and a person makes decisions more calmly when they already have a clear identity. They set boundaries more naturally, respond more consciously, and function more resiliently. That is precisely why identity is the center of transformation, and not just as a concept, but as an operational mechanism. True transformation does not start from action, but from the internal position. When a person does not change their inner identity, they will repeat old patterns. When identity is restructured, behavior falls into place, and this is exactly the key layer. After we have examined the limitations of previous approaches, the human as a system, self-management, stress and pressures, identity as the center, next comes how all these levels can actually be connected into a functioning structure. And this is where the real difference of the direct change method, the direct change solution, comes in. The problem with most models is not that they are wrong, but that they are partial. If we work with emotions, we are not working with beliefs. If we work with beliefs, we leave identity somewhere aside. If we work only with behavior, we are not working with the systemic position. And as a result, a person experiences temporary improvement but does not restructure the foundation, while integration means that all key layers are considered simultaneously, not sequentially, not separately, but as an interconnected structure. What are the 5 steps of the method? First, awareness of the internal map. The first step is clear. What am I telling myself? What is my internal narrative? What patterns do I repeat? What beliefs guide my decisions? How do I react under pressure? Without this diagnosis, any change is just guesswork and chaotic, and a person starts to notice repetition. The second point is state regulation. After awareness comes stabilization. If a person cannot manage their state, they cannot apply a new model. Regulation involves working with physiology, stabilizing the reaction, breaking the automatic impulse. This creates space for choice. Third, rearranging identity. Here we explore how I perceive myself, what I believe about myself, what role I have adopted, what standard of behavior I maintain. The new identity is not built with declarations or affirmations. It is built through consciously repeating the new choice. And the systemic position is very important. Here we look at ourselves in context. What do I maintain in this system? What kind of dynamics do I create? What changes if I take on a new position? This level is critical, because without it, a person often blames the external environment. Systemic awareness allows for responsibility without guilt. And behavioral integration? This is the final step. The new internal position must be expressed in concrete decisions, specific new communication, new boundaries, and new consistency. Here, the model becomes visible in reality. These 5 levels are not linear. They work as a network. A change in identity influences a change in behavior. A change in behavior also influences and affirms identity. Regulation of state actually enables new choices. The new choice changes the systemic dynamics. Integration actually means synchronization, and synchronization means sustainability. What is the difference between integration and a simple technique? People very often look for a magic technique. A technique is a tool, while integration is an entire structure. A technique can help in a specific situation. The structure changes the very way of functioning. The direct change solution method. This is not just a collection of techniques. It is a framework in which techniques are applied purposefully and in a connected way. And the model shows the strongest effect in the following situations. When a person repeats the same conflicts, when a person experiences chronic inner pressure, when a person cannot maintain new behavior, when a person wants greater stability, their integration leads to real change. And this is the future. The world is becoming more and more complex. Problems are becoming multi-layered. Single-layer solutions will no longer be enough. Integrative models are already a necessity because they create resilience, reduce the recurrence of patterns, foster autonomy, and build inner stability. When we talk about model transformation, the most important question is not how it sounds theoretically, but what actually changes, not at the level of feeling, not at the level of motivation, but in everyday situations. Practice shows that the new method of direct change, when applied systematically, yields results in several key areas. The first visible change is a reduction in impulsive reactions. Before the process, the person reacts immediately, raising their voice, becoming defensive, blaming, shutting down, withdrawing. But after applying the model, the person starts to notice. Now anger is being triggered. That is, there is now awareness. Now I want to defend myself. Now I feel fear. It is at this very moment that a pause occurs. This pause changes everything because it allows for choice. Additionally, the second point is an increased resilience to external pressure. The second result is exactly that. Before applying the model, a person can be shaken by criticism, financial risk, conflict, uncertainty, or rejection. But after integrating the model, a person stops feeling tension, does not give in to the situation, analyzes it instead of identifying with it. This does not mean a lack of emotions, it means managing your reaction. Additionally, decisions become clearer. The third effect is clarity in decision making. Many people suffer from chronic indecision. They seek approval, overanalyze, and are afraid of making mistakes. This is often the result of an unstable identity. When your inner stance becomes clear, your decisions become calmer. Not riskier, but more conscious. A person starts making decisions from a position of strength, not out of fear. The fourth effect is healthier boundaries. Before that, a person either endures too much or often explodes. And after integrating the model, a person can refuse, express disagreement, or take a stand without destroying their relationships. This comes from stabilizing one's identity and having a clear systemic position. Additionally, internal conflict is reduced. Very often people live in an internal dialogue. I have to do something, but I'm afraid. I want change, but I'm not sure. These internal conflicts are very exhausting. When the model is aligned, internal consistency increases and a person starts to feel less inner turmoil. Thought, emotion, action, they start to synchronize. This in turn leads to more sustainable leadership. The sixth effect in a professional context. The results are especially visible. Before using the model, a person tends to react mainly impulsively, but after applying the model, they start to react impulsively less often, communicate more clearly, avoid unnecessary conflicts, make decisions more calmly, withstand pressure for longer, and this increases the stability of the entire system. In addition, there is a change in the dynamics of relationships. When a person changes their inner stance, the dynamics in relationships begin to shift, and this is not a magical change.
That was very informative session, Stayana. We gained a lot of knowledge from your presentation. Thank you. We have a few questions from our audience. We will directly share it to your email. You can answer there. And please join on the backstage for the next sessions. Thank you.